Hey, Federico, we are back with another episode of App Stories. How you doing today?
I'm good. Busy. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm trying to stay warm. I mean, I think this is going to be a topic for a while on App Stories that
Oh, it's
we're
that
in
time
the.
of year where
It is that
John
time,
has to
John.
shovel snow
Shovel
every
snow,
morning.
and yes, I was out there this morning doing it just for a little bit, and the forecast has gotten better. But I think over the weekend the high is supposed to be like -5, and that's -5 Fahrenheit. So that's probably like -25 Celsius, something like that.
Wait,
20,
wait,
25.
no.
Yeah,
Minus 25?
minus. Yeah, yeah. It's going to be really,
Every year
really
I'm
cold.
shocked. We've been
I
talking
know.
about this every year. And I continue to believe that that is North Pole temperature levels. Like
Well,
that is insanity.
it
How
is.
can you survive? Like can you even breathe outside?
Well, it can hurt at times. You really have to
Well,
be careful because you can that that's why we get these winter
you're gonna
weather
freeze your
warnings
lungs.
where they say if your skin is exposed for more than 15 minutes it can freeze. And so you really do bundle up in a lot of layers and you go out there and you shovel a little snow and then you spend most of your day in the house, which is what we were doing already with the pandemic. So I guess not much different in some respects, but yeah, it's been persisting for a long time now. It's been a good solid week of cold temperatures here and lots of snow, and it's going to keep going for at least the next 7 days or so. So probably to the next time we record. I don't know. But what's new with you?
I've been playing around with this new utility on the App Store called Headlines. It's this
Yes.
real handy. Well, technically, it's a newsreader. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
technically, it's an RSS client. But the thing is, this is a utility designed for the iOS 14 home screen and designed to provide you with widgets. It's all about widgets for headlines, as the name says. So to show you the latest headlines from your favorite websites. And what's great about this is that you have a bunch of different options for widgets. You can have a small widget that shows you one article at a time. You can have medium widgets with lists of headlines from specific websites or from groups of websites. You can have a grid. You can have a newspaper style widget. You can have a mosaic type layout. It's really like there's a lot of flexibility. And what I really like about it is that it's super simple to use. When you open headlines, you just add websites that you want to quote unquote subscribe to. You can
Mm-hmm.
either paste the URL of the website or the RSS feed URL, or you can search for it. There's an explore section with a bunch of categories. And then you can tag websites. So you can say, for example, Mac Stories, you can add the Apple tag, but Chorus FM or Pitchfork, you can add the music tag. And then in the widget, you can say, show me all the websites that I added. Fine. It's going to show you a mix of headlines. Or you can say, show me this tag, right? And because
Mm-hmm.
widgets can be configured, you can have multiple versions of the same widget, maybe even in the same slot on the home screen. And you can flip through them, right, as a stack on the home screen. So what I did, for example, I set up a large grid widget, and the first version is all about the Apple tag. So it shows me headlines from The Verge, Mac Rumors, and 9 to 5 Mac. And the other, which is in a stack, so the copy of the same widget just shows me headlines from Pitchfork and Chorus FM, which are my two most read music websites. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a really cool way to get a sense of what's new without necessarily opening Reader, which is my main RSS client. And it seems to refresh quite often for a widget. So it's very nice that I can just swipe to the third page on my home screen and I can see what's new. And if there's anything that interests me, I can actually click the headline and it opens in the Headlines app in Safari View Controller. So it's really well done. An example of the kind of utilities that the developers can build now. So this is an app designed for widgets. It's not an RSS client. It's not a reader competitor. It just lets you set up websites that you want to follow, and then it provides you with widgets that you can add to the home screen. And I think, more broadly speaking, it's a very good example of something that we talked about before on App Stories. It's one of our recurring themes of how new APIs and new technologies are not just APIs and technologies in isolation. They are a way for Apple to create new segments, new markets on the App Store, And developers can make money off of actual shipping products that are made possible by these technologies. And so I subscribed to headlines, and like, this wouldn't have been possible in iOS 13, and now it is. And so this developer is making money. So I think this is why it's so exciting to keep up with the latest changes to iOS, because year after year, it's not just about advancing the platform, but it's also about continuing to expand the ecosystem and finding new developers, finding new ideas, and bringing them into the App Store. So that's what makes it real exciting for me. More generally speaking.
Yeah, it's a very important point, because I do feel that there's a direct correlation between the kind of WWDC we see in a particular year and how the next 12 plus months play out in terms of new apps and interesting apps. And I think iOS 13 was a real watershed for a lot of developers because of widgets, along with other things. Yeah, I've been trying that app a little bit too, because you showed me a screenshot, and this morning I kind of set it up myself and started picking up some video game feeds and things. I just thought, I have that stuff in Reader, and if I get behind on Reader, I often just mark all red for things like some of the entertainment and video game feeds that I follow. But having it on the home screen, I don't know. I just kind of glance at the headlines every now and then, and I think I'm more likely to dive into something that way. So I'm thinking about moving more of that stuff to that sort of system. I've been playing around with calendar apps still, because we talked about this before.
Calendar apps.
Yeah, we've been talking about this on and off, and I have been using the Apple Calendar app, and it really does meet most of my needs. But I find myself really mostly liking the list view in the calendar app, and so I've been trying TimePage recently. I've gone back to TimePage, and I've been seeing whether I want. Yeah, I want to see if I want to stick around with that one. Yeah, it's nice. It's almost exclusively a list view type of calendar app. You can swipe over and see a month view, which I appreciate, because I do have to schedule things a week or two in advance sometimes, and it's nice to be able to just pick a date that way. But I really do work mostly out of a list view, whether I'm in Good Task, where some of my lists have calendar items integrated right in there with them, or I'm in a calendar app. And so having a list view has been really nice, but I've only been using it for a few days now. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's pretty nice app.
All right, very cool. I should check it out again, actually.
Yeah, it's. I looked at some of the ones that you've been looking at, and none of them really grabbed me. And this is the first one that kind of works the way I like to work in a calendar app. So we'll see how it goes. But I've been pretty happy with it so far. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, you get fresh, pre-measured ingredients and mouth-watering seasonal recipes delivered right to your door. They cut out the stressful meal planning and grocery store trips so that you can enjoy cooking and get dinner on the table in about 30 minutes or less. And their Easy Eats offerings have tons of quick and easy meal solutions like 10 to 20 minute meals, low prep recipes, and quick breakfasts and lunches, which are perfect for your busy schedule. I enjoy cooking a lot, and I make a lot of the meals for my family, but I really don't like the prep part. I don't like having to decide what we're going to have to try to keep the variety up, or doing the shopping. And that's exactly the problem that HelloFresh solves. I get busy in the afternoon so often, and then the afternoon rolls around and I look around and I realize I don't have what I need to make what I want to make, so I end up just making do with what's on hand. What's great about HelloFresh is that they have delicious, interesting recipes that you can choose from. And once they're picked, HelloFresh makes sure that you've got all the ingredients you need. It takes all the hassle out of preparation. We recently tried firecracker meatballs, and they were delicious. They were spicy Korean-style meatballs on a bed of sticky rice with green beans on the side, and it was delicious. I don't know about you, but as much as I enjoy cooking, I don't like deciding what to make. And keeping things fresh and different is really hard, especially when eating out isn't an option for a lot of people right now. With HelloFresh, I get the variety I want with healthy meals that everyone in my family likes. So go to HelloFresh.com/AppStories10 and use the coupon code AppStories10 for 10 free meals, including shipping. It's a great deal. Again, that URL is HelloFresh.com/AppStories10, the number 10, and the code AppStories10 at checkout to get 10 free meals plus free shipping. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. Our thanks to HelloFresh for their support of App Stories. Federico, I think for our topic this week, we should talk about how the iPad can learn from the Mac and how the Mac can learn from the iPad. Because I think one of the things we've seen with Catalyst and a lot of the changes coming with the M1 Macs and things is the iPad and the Mac are closer together than they ever have been in terms of the way they work and the business strategy around it from Apple's perspective. But there's still a lot of places, a lot of low-hanging fruit where Apple could improve kind of the experience for people who move from one to the other, or where one platform could learn some new tricks from the other. And I wanted to come up with a list of ideas today and talk about those a little bit. What do you think?
Well, easy topic. First of all,
we have a long list, don't we?
You are a man of multiple Macs. Have you decided yet which one is going to be your main computer?
I have not. I did not clean up my studio last weekend.
Nah, come on. Okay.
This weekend, I promise.
Sure. In any case, you are these days, I would say, primarily a Mac user.
Right.
And I've been a Mac user for a long time. You never stopped using a Mac.
No, that's true. That's true. I go through stages throughout the year, and this year I've been more a Mac user than ever, just because we went straight from working on Big Sur and putting together that review straight into the M1 Mac. So I never really stopped using the Mac from like last June all the way until currently. And I always use a Mac year round, but there are parts of the year where I spend more time on an iPad, whether I'm working outside or moving around the house or whatever it happens to be.
Right. And you have a lot more enthusiasm for the Mac now than ever.
I do.
Okay.
I'm really happy with what's going on with the M1 Macs.
Okay, so give me a list of the things you as a loyal and newly found enthusiast Mac users would love to borrow maybe from the iPad. Like, what are the top things that you will like to? Because I have obviously I have a Mac Mini. I use it a couple of times a week. There are some things that I would like, and I do have some ideas for things that I would like to see on Mac OS from iPad, but I feel like it's more interesting to hear from you, from that kind of user. Like, when you work on your MacBook Air, when you work on your Mac Mini, what are the things that make you go, oh, I wish it was more like iPad OS?
Yeah, there are a bunch of them, and I think what really inspired this topic was listening to Jason Snell talk about this on Upgrade last week, where he talked a little bit about how he was using his M1 MacBook Air in the backyard, and he had AirPods connected to it, listening to music. He shut the lid, and he wondered, well, why didn't the music just continue like it does on the iPad? And, it's a good question. It's like, why doesn't it? I mean, especially now that we've got M1 chips in there that are closer to the chips used in the iPad Pro than anything else. Why doesn't the music continue to play?
Right.
And I think that that's exactly the kind of thing that...
Isn't that because the speakers are like next to the keyboard?
The speakers are, but if you have headphones attached, if you have wireless headphones attached, why not? Right?
Stops?
It does.
That's
Yeah,
not
no,
good.
He was using AirPods, and he shut the lid of his MacBook Air, and the music stopped. And that shouldn't be that way. It should continue to play. It has all the power to do that. So that's like a small example. There's a bunch of things with music that are really like little paper cuts in using music, to the point where I actually have set up now. I have an old iPhone 6S that I'm testing in this little stand on my desk as like a mini music player, because the Mac's music player is starting to drive me crazy, because you can't, for instance, I can AirPlay to the HomePods in my studio, or I could AirPlay to any speakers I have anywhere in the house, but I can't hand off. I can't, say continue this music upstairs to Siri, or there are lots of little things that drive me bananas about the way that music works. They don't have the play last option on the Mac like they do on iOS, which I think is an iOS 14 thing. So there are aspects of the way the apps work, which I think is largely driven by the fact that apps like music are still AppKit apps and not Catalyst apps. So they are, despite the fact that they're very close, they are developed separately. And as a result, some things get left behind. I know you guys talked recently on Connected about how on the Mac, there's been sorting of tasks for a while, but that wasn't on iOS. There's little things like that around the edges that really should be smoothed out. But then there are bigger things too. I think mobile data is one of those. I think now with the M1 Max, the battery life is so good that I really feel like there needs to be an option to have a cellular modem in there, whether it's 5G or just LTE, to make these things just grab and go on a level that they aren't now. Because
do you mean like an actual SIM card slot, like an iPad, or more like the virtual SIM card, like an Apple Watch?
I was thinking more like a real SIM card with a real data plan.
Like an iPad with a data plan.
Yeah, exactly. The thing about it is, though, is that it's easy to wish for. The difficulty is, I think you would have to implement some sort of low data mode, or a restructuring of the way the OS works when it's on a mobile network, because it's possible with a Mac to draw down an extraordinary amount of data very quickly. And if you're on mobile, that could cost you a lot of money, or just use up whatever data you have allotted to you. Especially like that's definitely an issue in the United States. So there are things that would have to change in the OS to make that a reality. But I think one of the things that probably has held it back in the past was battery life, because Apple had never really extended battery life for years with the Intel Macs. They always kind of engineered it so that the battery life stayed roughly the same. But I think adding mobile data to that would have really nicked the battery life. But now we've got these M1 Macs where we've had an enormous jump in battery life, to the point where I'd be willing to give up some battery life in exchange for data usage, especially if I had good control over when it was used and whether it was being used.
Can you give me an example of, so you, with your MacBook Air, with 5G, like what kind of workflow, like why do you think you would need mobile data? And I guess it's weird now because of the pandemic, like we're not back to regular life yet.
Right.
But imagine that you're back to 2 years ago. Like, do you mean in the context of you go to the coffee shop, you remove you take your MacBook Air and you open it and you don't have to worry about personal hotspot and that kind of stuff?
Right, exactly. You don't have to worry about whether the Wi-Fi is working at the coffee shop, or whether you've got your
at the airport,
your VPN or whatever it is connected. Or if it's something like, I've done this before, where we've gone on a trip and we've driven somewhere, and Jennifer's driving and I'm sitting in the passenger seat and I'm doing something on I'm working, right? Right. Right. And I can do that on my iPad. I can't do that on my Mac. I mean, I can work on my Mac, but I can't work on anything where I need a connection unless I use a hotspot. And hotspots are finicky. They're difficult to use, I think. I mean, they do work all right, and I've used them, but I'd prefer to have something that was a little bit more like all you do is open the lid of the Mac and it starts working. So I think, that's another situation. People who commute on buses and trains and things like that, perfect situation for that as well.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. No, I would love it. That'd be cool. I mean, I do have a cellular iPad Pro, so it has always surprised me that that this is not the case on the Mac yet. But I think the point on battery life, and now that becoming a reality because of the M1 system on a chip, I think that's a very good point. I think it's about time they do it. What about, so I'm going to ask you about this note that you have in our document.
All right.
iCloud Time Machine backups.
Yes.
I find the, right now I'm looking at Time Machine on my Mac Mini, and I find the whole thing very confusing. I set up Time Machine years ago. I have a Samsung T5 SSD tucked away underneath my desk. Actually, I stole this approach from David Sparks years ago. I used some
Velcro
tape,
or something, or tape.
Yes, some tape to actually attach it in a very ugly but effective way to the bottom of my desk. And Time Machine, in theory, works. I don't exactly manage it, but I always thought it was weird that like the whole thing is just kind of clunky, Time Machine. Like it saved me one time. It absolutely saved me in a very sort of a roundabout way. 2 years ago,
I think I remember this.
I accidentally deleted a draft, one of the chapters of my iOS review that I was working on. Working copy had a bug, and I was stupid in trying to work around the bug. But basically, I lost like 5 hours of writing, and I was desperate because I was already nervous and stressed out.
Mm-hmm.
But because this file was in iCloud Drive, I thought, okay, if my Mac Mini is on, and if Time Machine is working, in theory, it should
be there.
It should be in the Time Machine backup of my iCloud Drive directory, and it was. But I just felt like the whole thing is just very clunky. You need to have a separate drive, and you enter that weird like space themed UI with the windows that like with the with the carousel of windows that fly around.
Right.
And I guess what you're asking for here is for iCloud integration of all this.
Yeah, I am, because I do use Backblaze myself, which is a more traditional backup service where all your documents are stored in the cloud, and that's great. I don't think most people probably use that sort of service though, and everybody has a certain amount of iCloud storage that comes with their Macs. Now, Apple doesn't offer a ton of iCloud storage, but there is a precedent with at least the secure home video where if you have a camera, if you have a big enough plan, your video is stored in iCloud, but it doesn't count against your storage limit. And I could see something like that for backups as a way to incentivize people to back up and have it stored in the cloud, because it would be, I don't know, I think it's nice to have those local backups, but it would be even nicer if you had a local backup and you had the option to have an offsite backup that's in the cloud. And, I'd just like to have that sort of thing. And given that it's being done, something similar, I guess, is being done with secure home video. Yeah, I think that would be a great feature. But that's obviously, we're talking about Macs that have anywhere from 256 gigabytes to 2 terabytes typically.
Right.
And so I think it would probably be the kind of thing that they would want to limit to internal drives, because things like Backblaze, any drive you have hanging off of a Mac goes up to Backblaze for a single price, and that could be a huge drive. But I think there's a way to like protect the core documents, because I don't think a lot of regular users are using too many external drives to back up that core system and put it in the cloud somewhere.
And I mean, while we're on the topic of backups and Time Machine, I would say the opposite is also true. iOS and iPadOS, and in this case iPadOS, it can back up to iCloud, which is great, but it doesn't let you browse backups. It doesn't let you recover individual files or data from those backups. So
or save them locally. I think you should be able to save them locally too, I think.
Yeah. So I think it's a one of those situations where the two platforms could learn a few things from one another. In this case, I think the Mac has the right approach in terms of letting you recover data, because that's what backups are for, right? It's not just a peace of mind of knowing that you have a backup. The backup has to have some kind of functionality to it.
Right.
And so I think I've tested it on myself. It saved me when I needed it the most. So that's the right approach, but it doesn't support iCloud. iPadOS supports iCloud, but it's effectively just a backup to restore the entirety of your device. It doesn't let you inspect the backup. So I think it would be kind of cool to have, how on the Mac you have that UI with the windows? It would be kind of cool if on iOS and iPadOS, you would have like imagine a simulator, right? That opens. It'd be kind of weird because it would be like a simulator of an iOS device inside your iOS device. But the idea of restore my device at some point in time, let me play around with it and export data out of it without actually having it to reset my device, Just like just like using a virtual machine basically, but it's your backup. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, it would be nice. I mean, the best way to do that now is with a tool like iMazing, but that
Right,
requires a
but
Mac.
it,
That
but it's
requires a
mostly
Mac.
but it requires a Mac, and it's also like you're browsing a file system. You're
Right,
browsing a
right.
bunch of folders. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I'd really like to see come to the Mac is the ability to just yank drives out of the Mac without getting some kind of warning that makes you think you're corrupting your data. Because
mm,
this is a thing that is real now with hubs. Because if I have a hub sitting on my desk that I swap between my MacBook Air and my iPad Pro, I have to remember now that I can just pull it out of the iPad Pro, but I can't do that with the MacBook Air, or I shouldn't do that with the MacBook Air. I often just do it by mistake. I should be ejecting those drives first, right? But it's a little thing in the way the file system works between the two devices where it's different. But when you've got a single USB-C cable going into either an iPad or a Mac, it's hard to remember once you're doing that which one is the one you can just pull out and which one you have to actually do something. There's an initial step that you have to pass through.
yeah, I'm surprised that is still the case,
I
especially
know.
because on the iPad you can just do exactly what you described. It doesn't
Right.
care.
And for the Mac, it doesn't matter with the other things attached to it. Like the other things attached to the hub, whether it's the Ethernet cable or the HDMI or, some sort of USB-A peripheral or whatever it might be, those things are all fine. It's just that if it's an external drive, it can be a problem.
Right. Anything else you want to mention?
I think that I want to hear from you a little bit about automation, because we did just touch on this a little bit earlier, talking about shortcuts in the Mac. And I mean, I imagine a Mac future with automation where shortcuts is part of the existing system, that the existing systems maybe over time fade, because I would argue that they've already kind of faded over the last several years, but that shortcuts kind of sits at the center and it acts as the bridge between the two devices, between iPhones, iPads, and the Mac.
Yeah, well, obviously, like it shouldn't come as a shock that I want to see shortcuts on the Mac. And whenever I mention this, there's the argument from people saying, "But we have Automator, and Automator is great," and that is true. But it's also undeniable that Apple hasn't exactly paid a lot of attention to Automator over the years, just like they haven't done for AppleScript, for example, or for
Right.
JavaScript and AppleScript, that thing called JXA, which is a thing that exists and Apple doesn't really care about. And I think it's clear that the future, when it comes to automation as a way for users to create their own routines and these little utilities that save them time, and when it comes to integration with Siri, I think the future is, and the present, really, the reality of the situation is Apple has invested on two things to power this vision: Siri, the first one, and the App Store is the second one. And given how we now have things like universal apps, the ability to run iOS apps on the Mac, but really the fact that developers are more incentivized than ever, either via Catalyst or SwiftUI and universal purchases, to bring their iPhone and iPad apps to the Mac, I think it's obvious that all those features, all those actions that are available in shortcuts on iOS and iPadOS can now also become available on the Mac. And so imagine a scenario where, for example, say you have Timery or Working Copy, and you make a shortcut for those apps on your iPad, and that shortcut automatically works on the Mac without any change necessary. And I think what's interesting here, it's not just the starting from this foundation, right? Which was not possible even 2 years ago. It was unthinkable to say, oh, this iPad app also is on the Mac, but it doesn't look like an iPad app. It actually feels like a Mac app, but it's got the same technologies and it's got the same features. Now we are at that point of feature parity, but still with unique differences between platforms, which I think is important. And it's going to be important in the context of shortcuts, because I could see a scenario where you have feature parity between the Mac and iPad versions of shortcuts. Same actions, same editor. You can drag and drop, you can create folders. All of those features are going to stay the same. But just like on iPad, you have some iPad-specific integrations, Like, for example, the share sheet. Like,
Mhm.
for example, drag and drop is different on iPad, or integration with Spotlight, for example. I could see on the Mac some other exclusive features, like, I don't know, maybe you could use a shortcut in the menu bar, or maybe you could pin a shortcut to the quick actions in the Finder, right? Like, I can imagine this kind of advantage that Apple has, where the the underlying foundation is the same, but on each platform you have some specific features that take advantage of that device. On iPhone, you have shortcuts on the Apple Watch. On iPad, you have the ability to run shortcuts in the share sheet and all the other things that the iPhone has. So widgets, the keyboard integration, Spotlight, adding icons to your home screen. On the Mac, they could do things like the menu bar and the dock and quick actions in the Finder. Maybe I could go even a step beyond that. Maybe even have AppleScript integration in shortcuts. I mean, why not, right? So I'm excited about this idea because I know that if Apple is going to do this, they're not just going to copy the iPad version. I have a feeling that they are going to still do things that are exclusive to the Mac.
Right. And there should be access to things that are unique to the Mac too, like the terminal, right? I mean, that there ought to be terminal actions built into shortcuts on the Mac. I don't think that we're suggesting just bring over the iOS version wholesale without any changes. It definitely should be tailored to the Mac. And there is plenty of room for all the existing ways you can automate things on the Mac already, but it would be nice to be able to also bring those in with shortcuts as well. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to see. I personally find that to me the most powerful automation that I like using the most on the Mac is really coming from third parties these days. It's coming from Keyboard Maestro or Hazel or Better Touch Tool. It's those apps that I use for automation more often than something like Automator or AppleScript. And I think there's room for Apple to do more here. I think those apps show that. And I think a fresh start that doesn't necessarily get rid of the existing technologies, but really focuses on shortcuts is a nice way to go. Where should we go next, Federico? I'm never going to stop mentioning that I think we need TestFlight on the Mac, because I run into this constantly with developers who are new to the Mac, coming from iOS, and have struggled to get me, any version of their app that works. And it's certainly not something where, like, on iOS now, a lot of developers have hundreds, if not thousands of beta testers helping them find bugs and suggest changes. On the Mac, it's not like that at all. I mean, yes, there are other options like what was formerly Hockey, and I know developers who are using those things, but I still feel like this is something that if Apple really wants to bring as many apps as possible over from the iOS side, it really is absolutely necessary to add, and I really hope we see it this year at WWDC.
It's incredible, right, that they still haven't done it. It's been what?
Right. It's
7
been
years since they acquired TestFlight. I think it was in 2014.
Yeah.
John, and I don't want you to cut this from the edit. So this is the
Okay.
beauty of doing this show. We made a promise at the beginning where we said we were going to talk about two platforms, like what the Mac can learn from iPad and what the iPad can learn from the Mac. But the more we're having this discussion, the more I feel like I just want to talk about the Mac today. And I want to talk about iPadOS and macOS in the next episode, because there's a couple more things that I think I don't want to rush in this discussion about macOS, which I think is fascinating. Let's talk. Well, there's a big one, but before we get to that, MagSafe. I see you want MagSafe charging. What do you mean? So
I'm not sure.
Okay,
I'm not sure on this one, to be honest.
I used to love MagSafe, like the original one with the MagSafe connector.
Right.
But today's MagSafe on iPhone is different. And I just wonder, are you imagining like wireless charging like on iPhone, just something that isn't actually a connector, but just snaps to like a side of your Mac?
Yeah, or maybe it's even the existing puck somehow gets slapped on the backside of your Mac or something. I just feel like the convenience of putting down your phone on one of those pucks and having it charge is really nice. And yes, it would be, they're much bigger batteries in a Mac. It would take a lot longer, And you could always plug in a USB-C cable and charge it up that way. But I do kind of like the idea of having an ability to use one of those MagSafe pucks. I don't feel super strongly about this one, but I feel like that's a technology that I'd like to see available in more places. And while it's only an iPhone thing, and we're really talking about what the Mac can learn from the iPad, I think we'll see it on the iPad too at some point. Although I'm just not sure how it'll be. Do you think it'll be like in the corner of the iPad, which you put in the corner of the MacBook? The battery is mostly under the keyboard.
So on iPad, I think it makes sense to put it in the back. Even if
right.
there will have to be some concessions if you have a keyboard on. I guess some kind of pass-through charging could work if you have the Magic Keyboard case, for example. Or at the side, maybe something like rectangle or that snaps to the side, to the flat edge of the iPad. But really, I just feel like maybe the existing design of the puck attaching to the back of the iPad makes sense.
Right.
I struggle to imagine that on the Mac because
it is a little hard.
On the Mac, like the base of the Mac rests either on your lap or on a desk, so it can be at the bottom. And beneath the display, it's different from the iPad because the display is also the computer itself. But on a MacBook, the display is just the display. So it could be fun if you could attach the puck to the Apple logo.
That would be
and if there were
fun.
some cables running from the display to the battery, or something like that. That could be fun. It could also be fun to have an Apple logo shaped MagSafe charger.
We're creating some really hard engineering here.
I should be head of industrial design at Apple. Give me the Apple shaped MagSafe puck, and I'll be happy.
There are some docks that you can get for MacBooks that are big flat sheets that are basically large batteries with hubs on the side. Yeah, I just actually ran across one of these a couple of days ago. I'll have to put a link in the show notes because I don't have the name of it right off the top of my head. But they're the same size as the MacBook. You set the MacBook on top of it, and then it'll have like an HDMI and an SD card and some USB-A ports, USB-C, and a giant battery in this layer that sits on the bottom and charges your MacBook and gives you even more battery power. So it could be something like that, where it would be something you would sit down on top of it and then work that way, I suppose. That's a possibility. Mm-hmm. And you could use MagSafe instead of having to actually tie up one of the USB-C ports.
The last thing I want to mention today, touch input.
Ah, yes.
Okay, so I used to be very opposed to this idea.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it's going to be easy, this is just my opinion. But I'm sort of coming around on this idea, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed how many times I've tried to touch the display of my Mac Mini, and when I'm using Sylvia's MacBook Pro, her MacBook Pro, like I try to touch the display all the time. And I feel like I look at Big Sur and some elements are arguably, maybe even Apple didn't do it intentionally, but they are more inviting to the touch at the very least.
Right.
They look like they want to be touched, but
it's spaced out more. The text is spaced
out. They are
more
inviting. Yes.
Yeah. There are just a lot of elements that aren't like that though too. But yes,
absolutely.
Right.
I agree. I just feel like if the iPad is now a hybrid device,
mm-hmm.
why can't the Mac be the same without, like, the iPad became a hybrid device without sacrificing iPad OS? Why can't the Mac do the same without sacrificing Mac OS?
Yeah,
you following me? Apple was able to update the iPad without giving up on touch input, without giving up on the app ecosystem. They very intentionally and deliberately added pointer integration in a way that makes total sense for the platform.
It does. I think the difficulty there in part is that you lose precision with touch. And
Sure.
one of the things you can do with a Mac is, even though the iPad does have pointer support, it's not to the level of detail of a Mac's pointer support, right? Where you have an actual arrow that you can click on a particular pixel if you want to. So it's different in that way. And that's one of the things that concerns me, is that to really have good touch input, would you be losing something that a lot of people depend on the Mac, especially if you're doing, really fine design work or something in Photoshop, for instance? Would you lose something there? I don't have a philosophical issue with adding touch to the Mac. I do kind of think it would be interesting and kind of fun. On the other hand, I really struggle to see why Apple would do that if they've already got an iPad that supports this, that has a similar form factor if you get the right accessories. So, I feel like you're at that point, you're maybe mixing the metaphors a little too much, and maybe you lose a little bit of both in the process, which would be the thing that I'd be worried about the most.
I don't know. Maybe at the very least, it would be fun to have Apple Pencil support.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
I don't know. It's I'm not sure if I want it, but I keep thinking about it.
Yeah, there are plenty of laptops that do it, right? I mean, I know my wife has a Windows PC she uses for work that has a touch screen on it, and I handed her my brand new MacBook Air, and the first thing she wanted to do was touch the screen, which drove me crazy. But yeah, because it's just, I think more people are becoming accustomed to that, not Mac users, but it's definitely done, and it can be done. It's just a matter of whether it's the right thing to do, I think.
Yeah, we'll see. Anyway, I think we have a pretty good list of things we would like to steal from iPadOS.
Yes.
I don't think any of these that we mentioned today change macOS in a way that they're drastically altering its nature. I think they are pretty reasonable suggestions for simplifying and extending macOS, in borrowing from the things that Apple did right in iPadOS. And yeah, touch input is a bit of an oddball here, but everything else I think is pretty reasonable.
Yeah, I think that's the one that's kind of it's hard to know whether that's a good thing or not. It really depends on the implementation, I suppose. But the rest of them, I think, are things that I think shouldn't be too shocking to anyone.
Yeah.
All right, Federico. Well, I think that's a good place to stop. We'll talk about the iPad next time and what the iPad can gain from the Mac, I suppose. I want to thank our sponsor again for this episode, and that is HelloFresh. You can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. Federico is at Viticci on Instagram and Twitter. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.